Sometimes it starts quietly. You wake up feeling normal, and an hour later, it's as if someone has quietly changed the air. Your mood changes without reason, your body grows heavy, your thoughts become alien. Jung called this penetrating another person's shadow, when the boundaries of the psyche are blurred and the unconscious is revealed. An empath rarely asks themselves, "Is this mine?" They simply live within this feeling, considering it part of themselves. An empath doesn't listen, they absorb. They don't observe, they resonate. Someone else's anxiety settles in your chest like an old friend. Someone else's anger hides in your stomach. Someone else's emptiness settles on your shoulders. And all this happens before your mind even turns on. Because the empathic psyche works faster than thought. It reads the field, not words. Jung wrote that the unconscious speaks in symbols. An empath is a person for whom symbols are not locked away. They feel the tension in the room, even if everyone is smiling. They detect a crack in a person, even if they say the right things. And they often confuse it with their own instability, not realizing. They've simply become a container for other people's feelings. The most dangerous moment is when this becomes a habit. When you walk into a room and automatically adjust. Lower your voice. Become comfortable so as not to disturb other people's shadows. In this way, an empath subtly renounces themselves. Not dramatically. Not abruptly. But almost beautifully. Deep down, it feels like an ancient pact. I'll carry this, as long as there's no conflict. Often, this pact is formed in childhood, when love was unstable. When it was necessary to sense the mood of an adult to survive. And now this skill has become destiny. An empath reads people, but rarely reads themselves. Sometimes you find yourself strangely tired after a conversation. It seems like you didn't discuss anything difficult. But inside, it's as if you've been on a long journey. That's because you weren't on your own path. You went through someone else's internal war, someone else's repressed pain, someone else's unprocessed grief, silently, within yourself. Jung spoke of the process of individuation, returning to oneself. For an empath, this is a path of distinction. Where do I end and the other begin? This isn't coldness. It's a sacred boundary. Without it, an empath turns into a bottomless vessel, into which other people's emotions disappear. Along with their own life force. There's a moment of awakening. It comes not as knowledge, but as an inner click. You suddenly realize. I can feel, but not take. It's an almost mystical experience. It's as if you're getting your body back. Your breathing deepens. Your thoughts become quieter. You stop trying to save everyone, and the world doesn't collapse. Insight often comes through pain. Through burnout. Through the feeling that you're not living your own life. This is a signal from the unconscious. Stop dissolving. At this moment, the shadow begins to speak loudly. And if you hear it, a transformation begins. The continuation always begins with a question that an empath rarely asks themselves. What do I feel when no one is around? The answer doesn't come immediately. First, silence. Then fear. And then something genuine. And it is from this moment that the empath ceases to be a sponge. And becomes a presence. If something barely trembles inside in these words, it isn't necessarily pain, perhaps it is recognition. A quiet light that is rarely spoken aloud. It means you hear deeper than is customary. If there is a response, leave it. With a subscription, a warm word, your presence. It is from this living, quiet energy that stories continue to be born for those who feel the world not superficially, but with their heart and the silence between words. When an empath is alone, the silence is frightening at first. There are no other waves to cling to. No emotional background that tells you who to be. This emptiness feels like a loss, but in reality, it is the first touch with your own center. Jung called it an encounter with the self. It doesn't speak loudly. It waits until you stop being an echo. During this period, strange sensations begin to surface. As if the body is remembering itself. Old desires, forgotten impulses, vague images from dreams. Empaths often think they have lost themselves forever, but the truth is different, they were simply too busy living other people's lives. Now the psyche slowly regains the lost fragments. There is a subtle point that many miss. When you stop absorbing emotions, others may say, "You've changed." And it's true. You no longer respond automatically. You don't save. You don't dissolve. For some, this feels like coldness. But in reality, it is the first manifestation of inner integrity. Jung said that the shadow is frightening only until we recognize ourselves in it. For an empath, the shadow often consists of repressed anger, fatigue, a desire to distance ourselves. These feelings were long considered wrong. But they form a boundary. Without them, the empath becomes an open door again. Gradually, a new sensation emerges, selectivity. You still feel deeply, but you don't let everything in. It's as if a guard has appeared within. Not harsh, not aggressive, conscious. It asks, "Is this mine? Do I need this now?" And sometimes, for the first time in your life, you answer, "No." Dreams during this period become more vivid. Images of water, houses, and mirrors appear. The unconscious restructures itself. It is no longer. This is a subtle, intimate dialogue that cannot be rushed. The empath learns to be with themselves without running away. Sometimes guilt overwhelms them. It's as if you've betrayed someone simply by choosing yourself. This is an old program, the shadow of a savior. But if you look deeper, it becomes clear. You haven't abandoned anyone. You've simply stepped out of a role that was slowly destroying you. And the world, despite your fears, continues to spin. Over time, the quality of your relationships changes. Superficial connections fall away on their own. Instead, you find people around whom you don't need to defend yourself. Where emotions flow but don't overwhelm. It's resonance, not absorption. Jung would say it's a meeting of two integral psyches. At some point, you find yourself in a new state. Calm sensitivity. You sense the world, but it no longer passes right through you. An empath stops being a victim of their depth and becomes its bearer. It's a quiet power that requires no proof. And perhaps the most profound insight comes unexpectedly. You realize that your sensitivity isn't a punishment or a cross to bear. It's an instrument of consciousness. But only when you've learned to control it, rather than let it control you. From that moment on, the empath's story ceases to be about survival. And becomes a journey. When sensitivity no longer blurs you, a strange feeling of support appears within. As if the ground beneath your feet has suddenly become grounded, as if it had always been there. The empath begins to notice. They can be present with another's pain without collapsing into it. This is no longer flight or sacrifice, it is a conscious connection. Jung called this the transition from complex to consciousness. Previously, someone else's emotion automatically triggered an ancient mechanism, to save, to soften, to dissolve. Now, there is a pause between impulse and action. In this pause, freedom is born. Very subtle. Almost imperceptible. But it is precisely this pause that changes everything. During this period, the empath suddenly sees how many manipulations previously went unnoticed. Not out of malice, but out of the unconscious hunger of others. Those who used to bask in your depths begin to feel the chill. And sometimes they try to regain their former access. This is a test of boundaries, not your value. A new form of loneliness emerges. It is not empty, but transparent. You no longer fill the space with other people's feelings, and so sometimes it feels quieter than it should be. But in this silence, you can finally hear your own rhythm. It's not dramatic. It's real. Sometimes old emotions wash over you, those that were repressed for years because there was no room for them inside. Other people's feelings took up everything. Now the psyche repays the debt. Sadness, anger, and longing rise in waves. This is not a relapse. It is the integration of the shadow. You cease to be good and become whole. Jung wrote that integrity is more important than virtue. For an empath, this sounds almost blasphemous. But this is where the turning point occurs. You allow yourself not to be a source of light for everyone. And suddenly the light deepens, because it doesn't burn out. Gradually, the perception of pain also changes. You no longer try to heal it immediately. You allow it to be. And this paradoxically lightens the space around you. People begin to feel responsible for their feelings. Not everyone can withstand this mirror. But those who can, remain. At this moment, the empath begins to feel the archetype of the sage within themselves. Not as a role, but as a state. A calm knowing without words. Understanding when to approach and when to withdraw. This is not alienation, it is precision. Sometimes you catch yourself no longer wanting to explain yourself. Before, it was important to be understood, accepted, not offended. Now there is permission within to be misunderstood. This is one of the most profound shifts. It means that the center of gravity has returned within. And then an almost imperceptible miracle occurs. The empath stops absorbing emotions even when they're not trying not to. The psyche is restructured. Boundaries become not walls, but a field. You still feel the world, but the world no longer lives at your expense. At some point, an empath stops asking themselves, "Why do I feel this way?" Instead, another question emerges. What wants to manifest through me? This is a subtle shift in consciousness. You no longer perceive sensitivity as a reaction. It becomes a channel of awareness, not chaos. Jung said that a person becomes whole when they stop running from their depths. The empath has lived for a long time in the depths of others, not daring to dive into their own. And now they remain there. Without drama. Without the need to immediately fix anything. Simply being, and that is enough. You notice that other people's emotions still reach you, but no longer linger. They pass like the wind through trees. You sense direction, but do not become a storm. This is mature empathy, presence without absorption. Sometimes the past tries to remind itself. Old roles, familiar scenarios, requests to be like before. But inside there is already clarity. You see not only the words, but also the fear behind them. And you choose not to save, but to respect the path of another. At this moment, the shadow ceases to be an enemy. It becomes an ally. Anger protects boundaries. Fatigue points to truth. Loneliness reveals depth. Everything that once seemed weakness coalesces into a stable inner structure. Jungian individuation is not a retreat from the world, but a return to it as a different person. The empath no longer dissolves in the collective unconscious. They stand on their own axis. And that is precisely why their presence begins to heal, effortlessly, without words. People nearby may not understand what exactly has changed. But they feel. There is peace with you. Not because you have taken away their pain, but because you are not afraid to see it. This is a rare quality. It is not loud. It is real. And, perhaps, the most profound final insight. The empath was never broken. They simply learned too early to be a space for others. Now this space is their own. And they decide whom to invite there. You are no longer a sponge or a shield. You are a presence. Warm. clear, alive. And the world stops seeming so heavy when you stop carrying it. If these words echo quietly within, it means the process is already underway. There is no need to speed it up. It is enough not to return to where you disappear. The Empath's story does not end here. It's finally beginning. If this story resonates within you, don't analyze it. Simply write in the comments what comes to mind. One word. One thought. One memory. Sometimes it's precisely these responses that create a quiet space where those who feel deeply cease to be alone. If you want to see more stories like this, support the channel with likes and subscriptions. Thank you for being here and feeling together.